Mom, please have some water.
Mom, it's the weekend tomorrow. I want to take you out. You've done so much for me.
Thank you, sweetheart Minette. It's been a long time since we went out together.
I'll take you up to the mountains, a place with cool, fresh air, where we can look out over the entire city.
The air here is truly wonderful. Thank you, my dear son.
Mom, please don't do this. Her voice was no longer clear. It trembled with each word as if it were about to shatter in the freezing air. The wind on the cliff at the edge of Abuja roared violently, so strong it carried her desperate pleas away, scattering them into the empty void, where no one was there to hear. No one heard. No one knew what was happening. There were only two people standing there, a mother, and the son she once held in her arms as a newborn. The man standing across from her was not a stranger, not an enemy, but her own son, Chief Emeka Okoye. A name that commanded respect, the heir to a massive oil empire, a man everyone believed was born at the top. But no one knew that to give him this life, the mother standing before him had sacrificed her youth, her health, nearly her entire life. She went hungry so he could eat. She stayed awake through countless nights so he could sleep in peace. She endured humiliation and scorn just to give him a better path. He didn't run to look down. He didn't panic. He didn't turn back. He simply stood still, as if he had just completed something he had planned for a very long time. In his mind right now, there was probably only one thought: everything was over. An obstacle had been removed. A secret had been buried. An empire now fully belonged to him. But what he didn't know, and perhaps never even considered, was that some things in life cannot be erased with a single push. Some debts can never truly be wiped away, and some mistakes, once made, will return in ways no one can predict. Because in life, greed can blind a person in a single moment, but the price to pay can last a lifetime. If you've ever believed that every action has consequences, that somewhere in this world there is still something called karma, then you need to hear this story to the very end. Because what happens after that push is not just about paying a price, it is about a return that will change everything. If stories like this make you reflect more deeply on life, take a second to hit subscribe. It's not just a click. It's your way of supporting meaningful stories like this to keep being told. And leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from: Vietnam, Nigeria, or anywhere in the world. Every message you share makes this story even more meaningful. And now, sit back, take a breath, and step into the story of a mother betrayed by her own son, and a return that forces everything to pay the price. A few weeks after that fateful night, the city of Lagos remained the same, still loud, still vibrant, still rushing forward as if nothing had ever happened. The streets were packed with traffic horns blaring endlessly. Towering glass buildings reflected the harsh midday sunlight. Financial news continued to scroll across massive screens, updating every number, every shift in the market. Life simply went on. No one stopped. No one looked back. But at the very top floor of the Okoye Group building, a place that almost touched the sky, there existed an entirely different world. A world that was quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. Inside the spacious office, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling glass walls. Chief Emeka Okoye sat there, back straight, shoulders squared. Every detail on him, from his suit to his watch, was flawless. In front of him was a polished black desk so clean it reflected like a mirror. On it, a thick stack of documents, contracts, projects, numbers large enough to make an ordinary person dizzy millions of dollars. Then, tens of millions. He picked up a pen, paused for a brief moment, then signed. A clean signature, decisive. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Each time the pen touched the paper, it wasn't just a signature, it was another step forward for an empire. Another layer of power being built. Another piece completed in the grand design of his ambition. Outside the glass door, his assistant stood waiting. Perfectly straight, completely silent, careful. No one spoke. No one dared make a sound. Because they all understood the man sitting inside was no longer just the air, no longer a shadow behind someone else. Emeka now was the one in control, the man who held everything, the one who could decide the fate of an entire empire. His name was everywhere. Newspapers, television, financial platforms, the young genius of Nigeria's oil industry, the most outstanding successor Okoye Group has ever had. A new symbol of power and success. The praise kept coming. So much so, people had almost no reason left to doubt. They believed he deserved everything he had. But no one knew. Not a single person knew what it had cost him to sit in that chair. No one knew that just weeks ago his mother, Mama Ngozi Okoye, had disappeared. Strangely, mysteriously, without a trace. No explanation. No one had seen her last. No witnesses, no signs. She was simply gone. At first, they were just whispers, small questions, passing glances. But over time, those whispers began to grow, turning into suspicion. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was no longer the same. Eyes began to meet, briefly, but enough to understand. Questions were raised, but no one dared say them out loud. Where is Mrs. Ngozi? Did she really leave? Why so suddenly? The more they thought about it, the less it made sense. The more silence filled the room, the more uneasy it felt. A quiet tension settled in, not explosive, but always there. And yet, every time all it took was Emeka walking in, everything changed instantly. He moved slowly. His perfectly tailored suit fit like it was crafted just for him. Confident eyes, composed presence, and that smile so perfect no one could find a single crack in it. He looked at them, then spoke, his voice calm, steady, as if everything happening was completely normal. She has left Nigeria for medical treatment. Just one sentence. Simple. But behind it was careful preparation, complete documentation, clear medical records, official seals, every detail, meticulously calculated, a story built almost flawlessly. No gaps, no weaknesses, no room for doubt. And then, one by one, they fell silent. Not because they fully believed him, but because they had no reason left to question him. As for Emeka, he didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't hesitate. He kept moving forward, from one meeting to another, from one deal to the next. International partners began approaching more frequently. Bigger opportunities followed. With each passing day, Okoye Group under his control grew stronger, larger, more powerful. And in the eyes of the world, Emeka was a winner. A young man who had climbed to the top through his own ability. A figure many admired, but only when night fell, when the lights in the building slowly went out, when the long hallways became empty and silent, did another version of him truly appear. Emeka stepped into his private room, closed the door. Click. A small sound, but in the silence, it echoed strangely loud. No one was there. No eyes watching him, no praise, no perfection to maintain. Only silence. He stood before the massive glass window, looking down at the city below. Lagos had softened, golden lights stretched like a river. He held a glass of wine, didn't drink, just held it, as if he needed something to steady his hand. In those moments, time slowed down, so slow he could hear his own heartbeat. And then a sound appeared, faint, thin, almost impossible to notice, but enough to freeze him completely. Wind. Not the wind of the city, not the wind slipping through cracks, not normal, but something familiar, terrifyingly familiar. The wind from that place, from the cliff, from the moment he had tried to bury deep in his memory. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, told himself, "It's just an illusion. I'm overthinking. There's nothing there." But when he opened his eyes, the sound remained. Not only that, it grew clearer, closer, as if it was right beside his ear. Emeka. A voice, soft, distant, yet enough to make his heart pound painfully. He turned sharply, so fast the glass in his hand almost slipped, but no one was there. The room remained the same, empty, silent. No sign of anyone else, yet the feeling did not go away. A chill ran down his spine, a fear, vague but real. For the first time since that day, Emeka felt that he was no longer fully in control. He set the glass down, carefully, but his hand still trembled slightly, just a little, barely noticeable, but enough for him to realize. He didn't want to think further, didn't want to remember, didn't want to face anything related to that night, because he understood the moment he admitted something was wrong, everything he had built would begin to crack, and once it cracked, it could never be held together again. He clenched his fist, took a deep breath, lifted his head, stared straight at his reflection in the glass. A powerful man, a man without weakness, a man who had removed every obstacle in his path. That was the image he wanted to believe. But deep inside, a question quietly emerged, not loud, not urgent, but impossible to silence. What if it's not really over? That question, small as it was, weighed like a stone, and it was what scared Emeka more than anything else. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not what we've done, but the consequences waiting in silence to return. But Emeka was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but wrong to a point of no return. Wrong to the extent that even he, if he knew the truth, would never believe it. Because at the bottom of that cold, endless cliff, the place where he was certain everything had ended, Mama Ngozi was still alive. That night, as her body fell, there was no loud crashing sound like one might expect. No clear ending, only thick darkness swallowing everything. The wind twisted violently against the rocky cliff, creating chilling echoes. Her body struck jagged rocks on the way down, each impact tearing through her with unbearable pain. But then, in the middle of that endless fall, something caught her. A large tree branch growing out from the cliff. It wasn't stable, it wasn't strong, but it was enough to stop her from falling any further. A fragile miracle. So fragile that if it had shifted even slightly, everything would have truly ended. Blood flowed from her forehead, from her arms, from wounds she could barely feel anymore. Her breathing weakened, her consciousness faded. Everything around her went dark. And in the final moment before she lost consciousness, there was only one feeling left. Not pain, but being abandoned by her own son. When the first light of morning reached the bottom of the cliff, soft rays of sunlight slipped through the trees. Falling upon her motionless body, a group of people appeared. They were not wealthy, not tourists, not people anyone would remember. They were people living on the edge of society, people without homes, without status, with no one waiting for them. The kind of people the world above rarely ever looks down to see. They came there to gather firewood, to search for anything usable. Just another ordinary day. Until one of them stopped, pointing ahead. There's someone. The group moved closer, slowly, carefully. An older man knelt down, placed his hand on her neck. Silent for a few seconds, then he spoke, his voice low but certain. She's still breathing. No one asked who she was. No one questioned why she was there. No one demanded answers, because to them there was something more important than anything else. She was alive, and that was enough. They had no better option. No ambulance, no phone to call for help, no one to rely on. So they did the only thing they could. They took her with them, not to a hospital, not to a place with doctors, but to a small slum hidden deep in the outskirts. Shacks made from old sheets of metal, patched walls, people surviving day by day on whatever they could find. There was no comfort, no soft beds, no proper medicine, only an old worn mat, a small supply of carefully saved clean water, and hands rough but warm. For the first few days, Mama Ngozi did not wake up. She lay there, motionless, unresponsive, her breathing weak, then stronger, then weak again. Her wounds made anyone who saw her feel a deep ache, but they didn't abandon her. No one said, "She won't make it." No one turned away. A woman named Amina sat beside her every day, carefully cleaning each wound, replacing each cloth, patiently, without a single complaint. Another man, Baba Tunde, walked farther each day, searching for herbs, roots, anything he believed could keep her alive. They were not doctors, not trained. They had no modern knowledge, but they had something not everyone possesses: genuine kindness. Day after day, time moved so slowly it felt frozen. Then, one morning, her fingers moved, just slightly, almost unnoticeable. But Amina saw it. She froze, then shouted, "She's awake! She's awake!" Mama Ngozi's eyes opened, slowly, heavily. The light hurt. Everything around her blurred. Strange faces, old worn walls, unfamiliar sounds. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry to make a sound. Only one thought echoed in her mind. Why am I still alive? The days that followed were far from easy. Her body ached, every wound, every small movement. But the greater pain came from within. Her memories began to return, not all at once, but piece by piece. Emeka's eyes, his voice, cold, distant. I don't have a choice. And then the push. She did not cry, did not scream, did not blame. She simply lay there, staring at the fragile roof above her, silent. A silence so deep it was hard to understand. But inside everything was changing. Long nights, she couldn't sleep, not because of pain, but because her mind wouldn't let her. Every time she closed her eyes, it all came back, clear, sharp, impossible to escape. Day by day, her body slowly healed, her wounds closed. She could sit up, she could walk slowly, she could look directly at the people around her. And one day, she spoke, "Who? Are you people?" Amina smiled gently. "We're just people, who have nowhere else to go." A simple answer, but one that made her think for a long time. A woman who once stood at the top, now saved by those at the very bottom. A woman who once had everything, now forced to start from nothing. And in those days, something inside her changed. She was no longer the same Mama Ngozi, no longer the woman who only built empires, no longer the mother who only sacrificed, but someone new, calmer, deeper, and more dangerous. One afternoon, she stood at the entrance of the small shelter, looking out at the open ground. The wind blew gently, not as violent as that night, but enough to remind her. She closed her eyes, then opened them. Her gaze now No longer weak, no longer filled with pain, only absolute clarity. She turned back, looking at the people who had saved her, people who didn't know who she was, didn't care who she used to be, only knew she was someone who needed saving. She spoke softly. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but sincere. Then she stepped outside, 1 step at a time, slow, but steady. Because from that moment on, Mama Ngozi Okoye was no longer a victim. No longer the woman pushed off a cliff. No longer the betrayed mother. She was a woman who had returned from death. And this time she wasn't coming back to beg. She was coming back to take everything back. A year passed, long enough for people to believe everything had settled, long enough for a secret to be buried forever. But in Lagos, life never stopped. The city still lit up every night. Streams of headlights stretched endlessly across the roads. Parties meetings, calculated handshakes, continued day after day. From the outside, no one would ever think that an empire like Okoye Group could begin to shake. That name once symbolized power. It once inspired fear. But then, things started to change. At first, the signs were small. An international transaction delayed by a few days. A large payment held back by the bank for further review. A longtime partner suddenly asking to renegotiate contract terms. Things like that weren't unusual in business. At least, that's how Emeka reassured himself. He still sat in his top-floor office behind transparent glass looking down at the vast city below. His face remained calm, his eyes still sharp, the way he signed contracts still decisive as ever. In front of his employees, he was still the unshakable man. But then, it didn't stop there. Within just a few short weeks, everything began slipping out of his control. Key company accounts were frozen one after another. Not 1, not 2, but many enough to throw the entire finance department into chaos. Calls were made non-stop, emails sent endlessly. Emergency meetings stretched late into the night, but the answers they received were always the same. Dry, cold, under investigation, suspicious activity detected, temporarily frozen, no clear explanations, no definitive answers. Then came the contracts. Deals that once seemed guaranteed began to collapse. Some partners blamed internal issues, some cited market instability. Others said nothing at all. They simply withdrew, disappeared, as if they had never existed. And then the worst happened. Internal data was leaked. At first it was minor. A few emails, a few memos, things that, even if exposed, wouldn't cause a collapse. But just days later it escalated. Confidential figures, sensitive transactions, information that only a select few inside the company were allowed to know, began appearing online. Uncontrolled, irretrievable. The media jumped in immediately. Headlines flooded everywhere. Crisis at Okoye Group. Who is behind this attack? Is Emeka's empire collapsing? Questions no one once dared to ask were now being discussed openly. On television, on social media, in private conversations among elites. Those who once praised him now looked at him differently. No longer absolute trust, only anticipation, waiting to see how long he could last. And for the first time, Emeka lost control of his emotions. He could no longer sit still. He paced back and forth across the room, his tie loosened, his shirt collar open, files slammed onto the desk. The computer screen glowed with flashing red numbers. And then he shouted, "Who is doing this?" His voice echoed through the meeting room, loud, sharp, filled with rage, but no one answered. Not because they didn't want to, but because they truly didn't know. The cybersecurity team said the system was attacked from multiple directions. The lawyers said someone had deep knowledge of the company's internal structure. Employees began suspecting one another. Everything pointed to one truth. Whoever was behind this was no ordinary person. They didn't just want to sabotage him. They wanted to take everything from Emeka, piece by piece. In the days that followed, the Okoye Group building was no longer the same. The atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating. Employees spoke in hushed voices, avoided eye contact. Phones rang constantly. Every call could be bad news. Every email tightened the chest. Emeka barely slept. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His voice became harsher. The smallest mistake triggered his anger. An assistant dropping a pen was scolded. A delayed response was shouted at. But deep inside, his anger wasn't the only thing growing. Something else was rising, quietly, slowly. Fear. During the day, he tried to stay rational. It could be a rival, an insider, a financial conspiracy. He hired investigators, strengthened security, tightened control over everything. But at night, things were no longer that simple. When he was alone, he heard the wind again, the same sound, the wind from the cliff, from the past, from the thing he tried to forget. He startled, turned around, but no one was there. Only darkness and silence. He began to change, looking back when passing glass doors, checking locks multiple times, asking security about strangers. A man who once controlled everything was now being controlled by his own fear. Then, one morning, everything changed. That day, Lagos was overcast. Gray clouds covered the sky. The air felt heavy, as if something was coming. Emeka walked into his office. The room felt strangely quiet. And then he saw it. An envelope, sitting right in the center of his desk. No name, no mark, no one knew where it came from. He stopped. A chill ran down his spine. He looked around. No one. No sign of intrusion, but the envelope was still there. He stepped closer. Slowly, step by step, picked it up, light but heavy like stone. He opened it inside a photograph. He looked, and his heart nearly stopped. A woman, standing by a cliff, wind blowing violently. A familiar posture. He didn't need to see her face, he knew who it was. His hand trembled. His eyes dropped lower. A handwritten note, short, clear. You pushed the wrong person. In that moment, everything stopped. No noise, no thoughts, only one feeling remained: fear. He stepped back, breathing fast. That's impossible, he whispered. But deep down he knew, there are things that cannot be buried forever, and there are people who, once they return, will never be the same again. Outside the glass walls, the wind began to rise, stronger, sharper, and inside Emeka stood there, in his luxurious office. But for the first time, he no longer felt like he was at the top. He felt hunted. And somewhere in the shadows, a woman who had returned from death had begun her game. And this time she would not stop until everything was finished. The day of the biggest shareholder meeting of the year finally arrived. From early morning, the atmosphere outside Okoye Group's headquarters in Lagos felt completely different. Cars lined up one after another, luxury vehicles gleaming as they pulled up to the entrance. One by one, people stepped out, faces more serious than usual. No more polite smiles. No more casual handshakes. Everyone understood this was no ordinary meeting. Outside, reporters filled the area. Cameras pointed straight at the gates. Microphones raised. Questions fired rapidly. Can Okoye Group survive this crisis? Is someone manipulating things from the inside? Will Emeka still hold his position after today? No one answered, but the looks on the faces of those walking inside said everything. Inside the hall, everything was still perfectly arranged. High ceilings, bright white lights, leather chairs aligned in neat rows. The company logo remained at the center, shining under the lights like a symbol untouched by damage. But after just a few minutes of sitting, everyone could feel it. The atmosphere today was heavier. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. Only quick glances exchanged, the soft rustling of papers, and a feeling, as if something was about to happen. Shareholders sat in small groups. They didn't talk much, only whispered. Sometimes just a glance was enough to understand. Foreign investors sat quietly, faces calm, but their hands gripping documents a little tighter than usual. In the back, reporters were ready. Cameras on. Live streams started. Everything was being broadcast in real time. Then, right on schedule, Emeka stepped out. He appeared as he always did. Perfect suit, neatly tied tie, polished shoes. At a glance, no one would think he was in the middle of a crisis. But if you looked closer, you could see it. His eyes, no longer as steady. His smile, slightly stiff. The hand holding his documents, not entirely stable. He walked onto the stage, stopped, looked down. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him, no longer filled with absolute admiration, only expectation. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, then began. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed shareholders, partners, and everyone present today. His voice was still clear, still strong, but no longer natural. He spoke about the rumors, about misunderstandings, about recovery plans, about the future of the company. Every word, carefully prepared. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. Some nodded, some took notes, some even began to think maybe he still had control. But then the door at the back opened. A soft sound, just a small click. But in that space, it echoed loudly. Everyone turned. Cameras followed. Whispers spread. And from the doorway, a woman walked in. Not rushing, not hesitating, just step by step, slow, steady. The entire room fell silent. Some stood up abruptly, some covered their mouths, some whispered, "That's impossible." On stage, Emeka froze. His face turned pale, his eyes widened. He could no longer hide it. That woman was Mama Ngozi, alive, not a rumor, not imagination, but real. She walked forward, didn't look at anyone else, only straight ahead, toward the stage, toward Emeka. Each step she took felt like it struck directly into his heart. Emeka stepped back slightly, very subtly, but everyone saw. Mama Ngozi stopped, lifted her head, looked directly at her son. Her eyes were no longer the same, no longer gentle, no longer filled with pain, only truth. She took the microphone, no trembling, no hesitation. "My son." Her voice rang out, clear, slow. The entire room held its breath. "Tried to kill me to take everything." Everything exploded. Voices erupted, gasps, camera shutters, reporters stood up. Cameras zoomed in. Emeka stood frozen, unable to speak. Then the screen behind lit up. Evidence, images, documents, audio recordings. Emeka's own voice, clear, undeniable. The entire hall erupted. People began shouting, pointing, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." Then witnesses stepped forward. Baba Tunde, the man who saved her. He spoke, slow, clear. Then Amina, then others, one by one, piece by piece. The truth was revealed. Emeka stood there, but no longer above anyone. He began to tremble. Sweat ran down his face. He looked down. The eyes that once respected him now held only disgust. And then he collapsed. He couldn't hold it anymore. The empire fell apart, not with an explosion, but with the truth. The doors opened. Police walked in. No one stopped them. They moved straight forward. Read the arrest warrant. Emeka looked up, panicked. No, no. But it was too late. The handcuffs clicked shut. A small sound, but unmistakable. He turned, looked at his mother, his eyes red, and he screamed, "Mom!" His voice echoed through the room. For the first time, he called her like a son. But it was too late. Mama Ngozi stood there, did not step forward, did not speak, only watched. Her gaze cold, no more saving. Emeka was taken away. His footsteps faded, and she remained standing there, in the light, small, but stronger than all, because now everyone understood. The truth in the end will always come out. And when it does, no one can save the one who betrays their own family. Many months passed, long enough for the noise to fade, long enough for the media to move on to other stories, long enough for people to stop mentioning the name that once shook all of Lagos. But some things don't disappear. They simply change form. One morning in Lagos, not too loud, not rushed. The sky was clearer than usual, the sunlight gentled the breeze just enough to make the air feel calm. The city still moved at its own pace, cars passing by, people busy, streets crowded as always. But in another corner of the city, a place few had paid attention to before something new was beginning to take shape. That old piece of land, once filled with makeshift shelters stacked together, once a place where people survived on whatever they could find, once a place many would instinctively turn away from, had changed. Not into a luxury district, not into towering skyscrapers, but into a wide open center, simple, clean, yet warm. Walls painted in bright colors, clean hallways, windows open to sunlight, nothing extravagant, but everything carefully made. On the main gate, a name clearly engraved, Ngozi Foundation. There was no grand opening ceremony, no loud music, no long speeches, only people standing at the gate, quietly, looking inside. Some had once slept on the streets, some had been forced out of their own homes, some had been forgotten by everyone. They stood there, saying nothing, just looking. But in their eyes, for the first time in a long while, there was something like hope. Inside the center, nothing was luxurious, but everything was enough. Simple beds neatly arranged, clean blankets, a small kitchen, always with someone preparing warm meals. A corner for children with a few old toys carefully kept. A small study room, a space to sit and talk, a place where people could stop, rest for a moment, and begin again. At the center of it all, Mama Ngozi stood there. No longer the woman featured in business magazines, no longer the name tied to massive numbers, no longer the person everyone feared in a boardroom. She wore simple clothes, no jewelry, no display. But one thing had changed more than anything else. Her eyes, no longer tense, no longer heavy, no longer filled with calculation, only calm. A calm that comes from having gone through too much. Around her were the people who had once saved her. Amina stood talking to a group of newly arrived women, her voice gentle and patient as if she understood every fear inside them. Baba Tunde sat in a corner, slowly fixing a wooden chair. Every movement unhurried, but steady, just like the way he once saved a life without hesitation. Children ran back and forth, their laughter light and clear. A small sound, but enough to warm the entire space. Mama Ngozi watched them, for a long time, without speaking. In her mind, old memories passed by, days lying between life and death, pain that felt unbearable, long sleepless nights with memories repeating over and over again. And also, that moment in the hall, facing her son, hearing herself speak the truth. All of it, was over. A woman approached her, steps hesitant, eyes cautious. "Are you?" "The one who built this place." Mama Ngozi turned, looked at her, smiled. Not a polite smile, not the smile of someone in front of a crowd, but a real one. "Not me alone," she said, softly, slowly. "It's all of us." The woman said nothing more, just nodded. Her eyes softened. In another corner, a small boy sat alone, arms wrapped around his knees, head lowered, not speaking to anyone. Mama Ngozi noticed. She walked over, slowly. No rush. She sat beside him, didn't ask immediately, didn't pressure him, just sat there. After a while, the boy asked quietly, "Will anyone make me leave this place?" A small question, but enough to reveal what he had been through. Mama Ngozi looked at him. Her eyes softened. "No," she said. "No one gets pushed away here." The boy stayed silent for a long moment, then nodded slightly. That moment no one noticed, no cameras, no applause, but it was the moment a life began again. Mama Ngozi stood up, walked out into the courtyard. The sky above was wide, bright, peaceful. The wind blew gently, not violent like that night, but enough for her to feel it. She looked up, for a long time, as if looking back at everything. What was lost, what she had been through, what remained, and what was just beginning. She spoke softly, not loud, but clear. "Power," she paused, "is not something you hold on to with blood." Silence filled the space. It is something you give through humanity. No applause, no words, but everyone understood. Here there were no contracts, no competition, no schemes, only people. And here a new legacy was being built, not with money, but with the human heart. Final message. Some people are willing to sacrifice everything to gain power, but they forget. That power never stays forever. When greed leads the way, it will return and take everything back. But those who know how to lose, how to rise again, how to give, they don't just survive, they are reborn.